Okay, one of the things that we do with the surgery is we do a bypass. And with the bypass, you can have either short-term or long-term diarrhea, and it's important to contact me and work with me to get that fixed. If you don't get that fixed, it will lead to progressive problems, you'll get sicker, and ultimately you may get malnourished and have to have the surgery undone, sometimes as an emergency because you get really sick. So diarrhea is an important potential complication. You need to look into it and have it taken care of. Step number one, get to the doctor immediately and get tested for the infectious diarrhea called Clostridia difficile. Clostridia difficile, okay? Why? Clostridia difficile is one of those weird bugs that's now famous on TV because it's a new deadly bug that's out. When I started in medicine back in the 1970s, Clostridia difficile was a very rare bacteria found only occasionally in the intensive care unit in very sick people. Now it's out and about, and we find it out in normal people, out in our society who don't have any other reason and just get it, but it's still potentially deadly. So step number one, if you have diarrhea, is you go to your doctor and say, I need to be tested for Clostridia difficile. Now, as an aside, and to make myself look good, I'll tell you a story. One of my patients called me and says, I'm having trouble with diarrhea. He said, first things first, here's a bunch of things we're going to go through. Step number one, go see your doctor and see if you have Clostridia difficile. So she went to her doctor. Doctor said, no, you don't have any of the other factors. No, you don't have it. And she said, in a polite way, well, my bypass, Dr. Rutledge, said I have to have it checked. And her doctor said, you don't need it, you don't have it. And she said, please. And so she got checked, and she had it. So it can happen. It's out there, and you want to be checked for it as step one. It is a disease that can progress, can be deadly, and can take your life. So step number one, get checked for it. Okay, now after that, we're going to look at your diet. So what you'll want to do is do a diet history. There are a bunch of ways that I can make an MGB patient have diarrhea. One, I can make you drink milk. Milk has a milk sugar in it called lactose. The lactose sugar needs an enzyme called lactase to digest and absorb it. If you don't have that enzyme and the sugar from milk or dairy products stays in the gut, it is metabolized by the bacteria in the gut and it causes cramping, diarrhea, pain, and bad smelly gas. So, my patients, that enzyme is in the upper gut, and with the bypass, they often get problems with dairy products. Solution, first of all, look for it. Second of all, avoid it or take some of the enzyme which you can buy over the counter called Lactaid. And again, we can help you with that by your diet history. Point that out. Second of all, my patients get diarrhea if they eat fat. So you mentioned like eggs for breakfast or something like that. That's a pretty high-fat breakfast. In my patients, if you eat eggs, if you eat greasy foods, if you eat fried chicken and pizza and other greasy foods, you'll get diarrhea. Why? Because the fat is not easily digested because of the bypass. When we do the bypass, the area of your body that is almost miraculous because it can digest greasy, fatty foods and absorb it into the body is bypassed. So that your ability to digest, quote, regular food is interfered with and less fat is absorbed. Good, that's what makes my patients thin. On the other hand, if you eat fatty foods anyways, that fat will not be digested and absorbed. It won't go on your hips, it won't go on your tummy or your chest or under your chin. That's the good side. The bad side is that grease will stay in the bowel and the bacteria that are living in there will say, oh, she didn't want this pizza, we'll eat it. And then you get foul-smelling gas, grease, cramps, diarrhea, and problems from that. So again, poor food choices can make diarrhea after the MGB. Third, there's a whole bunch of foods that cause gas and cramps and diarrhea in regular people, and we think of beans, cabbages, cruciferous vegetables, broccolis, and things like that, so you have to investigate a person's diet for those things. Another very, 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 very important new thing that I am the discoverer of is that after the MGB, your risk of gluten sensitivity goes up. Okay. Does everybody know what gluten sensitivity is? Okay. Gluten is that protein in wheat which some people can't stand. It causes what's called celiac disease, diarrhea, cramps, problems like that. So again, when we look at our diet of somebody who's a patient of mine, we want to investigate, are you eating any bread products, wheat, cereals, things like that that might contain wheat? For example, do you ever eat Campbell's tomato soup? No. Ever eat any kind of tomato soup? Ever eat any kind of soup?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you remember any brand or kind recently that you have?
Split pea.
Okay. That you may be surprised to find out has wheat in it. So if you were having diarrhea from gluten sensitivity and you're having soups, you might be stumped as to why you're having diarrhea. It turns out that in a recent survey of 2,000 of my patients, half have gluten sensitivity, and half didn't even know about it.
Yeah, and I'm one of those. I pretty much cut gluten out, I thought, at least as much as I could.
Good.
And it made my gas way less, for sure.
Good. So again, there are a bunch of steps. The foundational step, and I'm not going to go through too much more because we were talking quite a bit this morning, and we have our post-op patient. Does somebody have to get to a flight? Okay, all right, good. Are you getting tired of me talking yet?
No.
For the video's purposes, no one said yes. Everybody said, keep talking, Dr. Rutledge. So, number one, go see if you got C. diff. Number one.
Now, and how long, I had that tested maybe a couple of months ago.
Yeah, that's good. Probably good, but I wouldn't hesitate to go back if you're still having it. Number one, look for C. diff. Number two, food diary, see what you're eating, and then we'll work together with that. And there's a bunch of things to look for: lactose, gluten, fat, other things like that, and we can usually take care of them.
Okay.
Then finally, sometimes, all those things we can't fix the diarrhea, and we've made the bypass, I made the bypass too long. If I make the bypass too long, you'll have diarrhea, persistently lose weight, lose too much, and become malnourished and have a revision. So we'd like to get the diarrhea under control, because otherwise you're going to have the surgery revised. And so that's not anything anybody really wants. The other thing is that once we've tested all those things, you can also use Imodium to help slow down your gut from the grocery store. But you may not use that until we've done some of these other things. Otherwise, it can make things worse. But that's the steps. So those of you listening out there on the video, call me and get a food diary together, and we'll be looking for gluten, lactose, fatty foods, cruciferous vegetables and cabbages, beans, things like that. Sometimes you get the funniest things. People say, I'm really having trouble, I have cramps, nausea, diarrhea, bloating. My doctor says I have the surgery. I say, send me a food diary. You'll see, beanie weenies, baked beans, cheese, milk. It's like you're reading this going, no, come on, you're kidding. I go, so I'll write next to their ER, their food diary, their email, their food diary. I just cut and paste no next to each one of them with an X. No, 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 no. And they'll come back, well, I don't know, what can I eat? I say, well, healthy green salad, fruits, vegetables, healthy foods like that. So. But I love it, beanie.